For the last few months, I've been working on a video about the Overwatch League and why I personally think that it hasn't worked out, but in the process of making that video, I've realized that there's a lot of ground to cover in the path to pro that I don't think has really been talked about enough. In March, I put out my video about contenders, where I went over the absolute chaos of the league's structure, which caused severe psychological damage to me, and I don't think I'll ever recover from trying to edit that abomination. However, there's also another part of the path to pro that's really overlooked, and that's the Overwatch Collegiate circuit. Like with contenders, Collegiate is a Blizzard-run league, but unlike contenders, it's a lot less directly integrated with the Overwatch League and the general path to pro. Collegiate is a bit of a weird middle ground between Blizzard's top-down control over the Overwatch League and contenders and a more typical collegiate esports circuit. Universities have pretty wide leeway in terms of how intensely they want to engage with the circuit, with some offering full-ride scholarships or paying players to play for them, while other schools are less invested in the process. Initially, I thought I'd do something similar to what I did with contenders for collegiate, but I realized while I was workshopping that idea that there's actually a major element of the path to pro and esports in general that I don't really see being considered very much. What's it actually like to play in these circuits? How and why do people play in collegiate? When we talk about esports, we don't tend to consider the actual path that the players have to follow to get to the top, or the experiences that they have on the way, and that's especially true when they're still in those lower circuits. The lower circuits are the laboratories of any competitive scene. There where new strategies are tested, new talent is cultivated, and new ideas about what the scene could or should be emerge. But what's it like to actually be in that environment? I also know there might even be a few people watching this who are shocked to learn that there are scholarships out there for people who click heads real good, so this might be a fun adventure for all of us to go on. Before we get to the video itself though, just a quick reminder that my channel members will be choosing between these 4 topics for my other April video. The poll will close at the end of the day on April 10th, and as of right now, the politics of ping and performance is currently in the lead. If you'd like to have your say, there are still a couple days left to snag a $5 membership to vote in the poll. The video with the most votes will be coming out on or around April 21st, depending on how things go, so be sure to click that join button and have your vote counted. Now, I'm sure it's a great shock to anyone who's ever watched me stream or paid attention to my gameplay in the background of my videos, but I am not a collegiate level Overwatch player. I peaked at low masters back in the single digit seasons of competitive Overwatch, and right now my highest rank is Diamond 5 on DPS. I don't know what it's like to be a collegiate player. That's why I'm super excited to introduce Paz to you. Paz is an Overwatch content creator who I met a while back after he reacted to my survivorship bias video, and you can see his reaction in the card up above, and he has graciously agreed to be part of this video.
Hello everybody, my name is Paz. I'm a GM1 top 70 peaked in Overwatch 2 flex support, meaning specifically Ana and Zen for Penn State University. I also make Overwatch content on my YouTube, which I'm sure will be in the description. I'm really excited for this opportunity, and I hope that this can be educational for everyone.
In late March, I interviewed him about his experience as a collegiate player, and you're going to be hearing from him throughout this video to talk about his experiences and his perspective on the scene. Whenever you see his logo replacing mine in the bottom right, that's him speaking. The collegiate scene is a bit inscrutable, so his insights were really important for figuring out what angle I'd be taking with this video, and I can't thank him enough for participating. Go check out his channel, subscribe, all that other good stuff. He has a lot of great educational content, particularly for support mains, and is just generally a lot of fun to watch. For this video, I'm not going to be playing the full unedited interview that we did. Aside from it being 2 hours long, we also just went on a lot of tangents that were not relevant. Instead, think of this video more like an actual essay on the topic of collegiate, with Paz as my main first-hand source that I'm going to be quoting throughout. Anyways, at this point I've rambled enough about the setup for this video, let's just get into the actual topic. Part 1. What is Overwatch Collegiate? As I already mentioned a little bit, Collegiate was one of the core parts of Blizzard's vision for the Path to Pro alongside the Contenders circuit when the Path to Pro was initially pitched. While Contenders is a lot more open-ended in terms of who can participate, Collegiate is, as the name suggests, a league exclusively for esports teams from post-secondary educational institutions. Universities, colleges, polytechnics, trade schools, etc. can field teams and enter the league. Lots of games have a collegiate esports scene, but Overwatch Collegiate, like a lot of competitive Overwatch, is somewhat unique in the sense that Blizzard is running this stuff from the top down. And just like the rest of the top level of competitive Overwatch, it's way more complicated than it needs to be.
So Collegiate is rather confusing. Essentially in the fall semester, so when the school year first starts out, there's a tournament, I think starting in around October or November, where essentially you're just playing in this like it's not main season, but it still counts, like you get money for it. The way it works is that you get put into, you're essentially playing your record to try to get to top 32. And then once you get to top 32, you get put in almost like a March Madness kind of bracket where it's, I think, single elimination until you get to a certain point. And that is contrary to the spring semester, which is after winter break, where the tournament starts in March and you're still playing for seeding, but instead of the top 32 teams in the March Madness bracket, there's the top 64 teams that get placed into 8 different groups. And this is like the legitimate, the true actual collegiate tournament. I don't know why they differentiate between the two, but the top 2 of each one of those groups, when they play their own round robin within themselves, then get placed in the top 16, which you do a playoff double elimination bracket and play to the end. There's only 2 big tournaments that are sanctioned by Blizzard, and it's for the first semester and then the second semester of each year. It's really, really complicated, but it makes sense when you're actually playing in it. Generally, it's a decent idea. It's just you're playing for seeding. You get put into the way it works for that semester, and then you play it, and then you win, you lose. Maybe you get money, maybe you don't. Yeah, whatever.
While the actual collegiate circuit itself is obviously the focus of this video, teams don't just play in the Blizzard-sanctioned league. We'll get into what players actually have to do as part of the obligations of playing for collegiate later in the video, but it's important to remember that these teams play a lot of games outside the actual league matches. For one, there are a whole lot of practice scrims, but there's also a lot of tournaments that aren't part of the regular season that teams compete in.
A lot of the collegiate experience is defined by what your college does outside of that league. Doing that league is important so that you can get better scrims and that you look better, but like the LANs, the in-person events, the side tournaments you're doing, just the overall social aspect of it is what really defines collegiate from, let's say, like open division or contenders. It's a much different feel.
Collegiate teams are all competing against one another in a big pool in the league in general, but a big theme of collegiate that you'll see throughout this video is that there are effectively 2 tiers of schools. The schools that take it extremely seriously and provide scholarships or even pay players to play for them, and the ones that are a bit more casual about it.
People are generally just competing for, in the main Blizzard tournament, they're just competing for money and the national title. But in reality, most schools are not going to get there. And it's much more about other things that your school is doing and promoting for maybe just like your own scholarship money. But it's variable depending on the school you're on.
Personally, I was also really curious about what players actually get out of this experience when I was looking into it. Overwatch League players make an annual salary, Contenders players take home their 2 small shares of 2 small prize pools, but collegiate esports are, obviously, part of a collegiate environment, and that can come with some unique perks compared to the other Overwatch competitive leagues.
I know a lot of people that are like masters in Overwatch that are on full rides to like different colleges, and it can be a very good financial thing for people to pursue. It also can be a good social thing that you can pursue. A lot of my friends I've made through playing Overwatch for Penn State. I mean, the money aspect, it depends on how good of a player you are. Most people are not going to be making bank off of collegiate esports. But overall, if it's something that you enjoy, this is definitely something that you should invest in because esports is likely going to grow and you can make good connections here as well. It's variable depending on who you are, what your goals are, but it can serve to every type of player, which is unique compared to like very competitive esports and like contenders.
I mentioned earlier as well that the Overwatch Collegiate scene is somewhat unique compared to collegiate level esports for other games, and that's something important to emphasize while we're still talking about what collegiate actually is. Like, how does collegiate shape up against the Rocket League collegiate circuit?
The way that they do it is they essentially scout teams in a regular season and then they put them in a separate league, the top performing teams, and then they do a round robin amongst the best teams, which is good because then you have a more realistic ranking of where those teams are in a given moment. While Overwatch, and this is true to every single part of their esport, for Open Division specifically, is what this is most like. They just place you play a bunch of games to get seeded for playoffs in the end. But the thing is that there's a lot of luck involved there, where it's like, oh, I played against Maryville and Northwood, I'm 8-2, compared to another school that maybe shouldn't have been 8-2, but they played against like community colleges the entire time. It is Swiss generated, where like, for example, you have to play what your record is. So if I'm 4-2, I have to go against other 4-2 schools. But the thing is, it's not calculating based off of the level of that 4-2 record is, if that makes sense. Like I could play really good teams and be 4-2, but I could also be really bad and be 4-2.
And that last point is actually really important to acknowledge because, as Paz mentions,
my biggest problem with collegiate Overwatch right now is that there's only 2 tournaments and it's so luck-based that a team could not be top 64, but still genuinely be a top 8 team. And that is just preposterous to me. That makes no sense.
hopefully by this point you've got a bit of a feel for what Overwatch Collegiate actually is. We've talked about the structure of the league, the prizes, and the general scene. And at this point, you might have the same question in your mind that I did. Part 2. How and why should someone compete in Collegiate? When it comes to contenders, anyone can theoretically participate. Anyone can form a team and throw their hat in the ring for the open division, and from there, they can progress through the league's structure. If you want to learn why that's not nearly as straightforward as it sounds, be sure to check out my video, I Have Beef with Whoever's Running Overwatch Contenders. By contrast, the process for getting into the Overwatch League is pretty straightforward. A team will scout you and sign you to a contract. There's no play-ins to actually join the league as a main team for the most part, although Contenders teams can now participate in the Overwatch League, but that is a topic that I will not be addressing in this video because I have already lost enough brain cells to Contenders by this point. When it comes to Collegiate, it's pretty straightforward from the organizational side of things. Any post-secondary campus can form a team and enter the Collegiate League, and from there follow the structure that Paz was talking about earlier. However, where things can be a bit different is how the players specifically get involved. While the process for joining Contenders teams is the Wild West, and the process for joining Overwatch League teams is pretty formalized, Collegiate teams can really run the gamut. And like a lot of things in Collegiate, it depends how seriously the school wants to take it.
It is all variable depending on the school that you go to. If you are trying to make it and play Overwatch for a school that is going to give you a full ride that's like a top 8 team, so like, for example, the Maryvilles, the Northwoods, the Harrisburgs, all of those places, you're typically already going to be playing professionally, and they're going to scout you out and you're going to trial for them based on they are scouting you, and you have to make the team before you're going to be going to that university. For most other colleges that don't give their players full rides and you just happen to play for the university, for example, at Penn State, we typically just hold the trial near the start of each semester to try to find anyone that might be new. And it really comes down to you're already enrolled in the university. Hey, we have an Overwatch team. Try out. I make it or I don't make it. And then you go from there.
Also, actually, I just want to clarify something that Paz has mentioned a couple times. What is a scrim?
So scrims, it's a very like weird, controversial thing in terms of like what people think scrims are actually for. Scrims are for improvement. That's it. If you're playing scrims to win, nope, you're doing it wrong. So the big thing is when scrims, it's literally just like a team practice. You're practicing against another team that is of a similar skill level. The quality of scrims drastically better than the quality of ladder. Like, I would say it's a good, like, 600 SR difference for most players. When you get to the top, like, you're still playing against the same people in ladder anyways, so it doesn't really matter. But when I used to be Masters, scrimming in Masters, I felt like I was playing in a Grandmaster game because of just how much different the quality of it is.
Another big question I had around this subject was about how picky the schools are going to be. Are they going to automatically reject anyone who's not a GM? Do you have to prove yourself? Does rank finally actually matter for something in the world of Overwatch beyond just being a shiny medal on your profile that Overwatch's matchmaking is going to fully ignore?
For the top teams, the cream of the crop, it's going to come down to like how many people know you in Path to Pro. Did you have good results? Are you at least top 16? Are you at least tier 3? The best schools are going to ask for that. Schools that aren't giving scholarship, you got to play with what you got. At Penn State, we still take it as seriously as we can, reasonably, without the scholarship that we have. I mean, we do have some pretty decent finishes for not having money. For those, typically we want to have people that are 4,500 or have peaked up there. But GM is kind of what we had to default to this semester because we just didn't have those players to show up. So most teams, I feel like, yeah, sure, if you're Masters, if you're Plat, whatever the team is at and they have a role that's open, go ahead and try out. It's gonna be different based on the environment, but I'd say it's pretty welcoming for most players, reasonably for most people, because they're not going to be trying to go to Harrisburg University just because they want to.
All right, so at this point, I think we've kind of covered the how part of the question I asked at the top of the part, but that still leaves us with the why part. Why should someone play in Collegiate? What do they get out of it? To me, what I was really curious about is how the game plays differently when you're playing in that organized competitive environment as opposed to just playing on the ladder.
When you're on a whole 5 stack, you're going to be playing the meta on the whatever that meta is on that map. You're going to have set plans for that map. You're going to know how each individual part is playing. So if you want to make a play, want to try to carry, it's easier to do so because you have an understanding of what is going to be going on. While on ladder, it's a shit show, for lack of a better term. Like it's just everyone's doing whatever they think is best, doing their own thing. Like it is 10 times harder in Collegiate, but it's also 10 times easier if you know what you're doing because you can just play the game the way you're supposed to play it.
And that last point, the point about how this is playing the game the way you're supposed to play it, is to me already a pretty good pitch for why somebody might consider Collegiate. Overwatch is a game built for team play, but the ladder isn't really built to facilitate that. In ranked, people aren't necessarily coordinating, they aren't necessarily on the same page, and they don't really have the capacity to build relationships and understandings with one another to the extent that they can deliberately build strategies around what everyone else is actually good at. We've all played those rare games of Overwatch where things just work, where it feels like everyone's chill, everyone's working together well, and everyone's good at what they're doing. Playing in an organized competitive environment means that you're not just rolling the dice in every match and praying you get a team like that. You're playing the game the way it feels like it was built to be played, and I think a lot of people would agree that Overwatch would be a lot more fun to play if it was in a context where that level of coordination was the rule and not the exception.
if you want to play Overwatch competitively, if you want to make friends playing Overwatch and you want to experience what it's like in a team environment, 100% Collegiate is a great place to do it because you know these people in person. There's no leaving, so people are committed to each other, and you're going to be building a friendship.
However, it's also important to recognize that this isn't something that everyone's naturally well suited for, and also that mechanical skill isn't all that matters when it comes to that kind of an environment.
The thing is, what I want to caution people is that when you go in to a team environment, it's very important that you respect what everyone's values for that team is going to be, and you try to align them as much as possible, or else someone's going to get hurt, someone's going to get irritated, and it's going to be a dumpster fire. Collegiate Overwatch can be a great thing if everyone's on the same page, but just make sure you are on the same page before you push on. There is a huge difference from playing ladder and playing in scrims. Anyone that has played in scrims can 100% back me on this. I'm not even worried. Like, that's not a hot take. The big thing is it's generalizable to all competing, like just being in a scrim environment in general. The problem is with a lot of scrim environments that are below tier 2 or even in tier 2 as well, the team environment is such an important thing that you have to refine, and it takes a certain kind of player to get a perfect environment.
That bit about the perfect environment is also an interesting one to me, especially in terms of how much a player's level of investment and ability to work well with others matters.
So just so that we're all on the same page, what I define as the perfect environment isn't necessarily, let's say you have a trial and there is a GM DPS player, but there's also like a Masters DPS player who's like significantly worse than that GM DPS player. But the Masters player has the same goals and values as all the other teammates compared to the GM guy that's just like, oh, whatever, I don't care, I'll just play every now and then. While picking up that short-term pickup for the Masters player is kind of bad, you're taking a worse player, you're not going to get as significant of results. If that team sticks together, you will go farther with that team because they all have this kind of like brotherly bond to push on and like grow together. So this is the distinction I have in a path to pro setting where everyone's just trying to get big placements so they can get to the next big thing. They can climb just a little bit farther. Most of the time, people make that mistake of getting impatient and picking that player that might be better but isn't as good of a fit. Collegiate switches that up. You are forced to play with these people for 4 years. So you are making that long-term commitment and you don't have an excuse to just run away. And that's why the collegiate environment, I think, is so much more healthy because it forces people to grow together and it's so much more rewarding.
That's not to say that players can just coast on good vibes, as Paz will tell you himself. At some point, you'll have to bring serious skill to the table, especially at a competitive school. If you're looking to enter collegiate, the energy you bring to the table is definitely a major factor, but not at the total exclusion of your skill level.
For most environments, you have to be reasonably good enough to be playing with people. So, for example, at Penn State, we have a full GM1 roster except for one player that's like GM3. Realistically, he's not so far behind that it's going to be like, it's impossible to work with this dude. Does he need to work on himself? Yeah, but like he's a freshman. He has a lot of time to grow with the team. I find that is valuable. Now, there is a certain cutoff point where it's like, if we're picking up someone that's like a platinum player, it's going to be really hard because then you're holding everyone back from really improving. Like, for example, I still value your work ethic, your values that and how much they align with the team. That is so much more valuable than your personal skill, but your personal skill can't be so far off of that of the team that it hinders the overall team's performance. A stronger correlation between value alignment and performance as compared to just how good people are in performance. It's so much more valuable to have the value commitment.
It's not just about the players, though. What's the pitch for a school to set up an Overwatch Collegiate team, or even just an esports program in general?
So, I mean, if you're a really small school, you need to differentiate yourself somehow. That's what Harrisburg's been doing in Maryville. So if you want to hard focus on esports, that would be your reason to do so. If you're a big state university, and the main thing I pitch to Penn State for them to maybe bring scholarships or something, is that having foreign exchange inclusivity so important. And if you have the money, it's not like incredibly expensive compared to what people are spending on football. Like, you have the money. It's more so just understanding the reasoning why you are trying to push for this. I can't advocate for every state school to be like Illinois, the Redbirds, and be like, oh yeah, just get the best players of all time, get them on a full ride, and bam. I can't advocate every school to do that. What I can advocate for is think about the foreign exchange students that are coming to your school, the reality of depreciating collegiate mental health, and then maybe this is a way for you to tackle that problem outside of, oh, well, we have a wellness group that does this every 2 weeks. While that is helpful, it isn't the full story. Not everyone can get behind that. So this is just providing another avenue for people to explore their interests and feel a better sense of belonging.
I'll be honest, I hadn't really ever considered making the pitch for Overwatch Collegiate or esports in general from a mental health perspective, especially given that Overwatch has had a unilaterally negative impact on my own mental health, but Paz's point is actually a really good one. It doesn't just benefit the players to have this environment, but also the school. It's a relatively low-cost investment in building spaces for students to connect, particularly for foreign exchange students, and it can massively help improve people's connection to their schools while giving them a sense of community. From my own personal experience, post-secondary is pretty much always a stressful experience, and that experience only gets harder when you're a long ways away from home, especially if you're in a place where you're trying to keep up in your second language. Still, a lot of schools are a bit slow on the uptake, and it can be hard to really get them to take action.
They do not care at all. They have started to try to care because we have brought it up to them like, hey, you have foreign exchange students that are like not doing well, and this would be a way to help them. But nowhere near on par to where other schools are taking it. And that's going to be variable depending on where you go. The bigger university you go, the better their football team, the less likely they are to really care about esports because it's all about money. I mean, there's no real financial gain that we'll get from it apart from, hey, do this for your students. Like, make the experience better so they maybe donate more to you when they graduate then and they're alumni. Like, that's kind of the financial, I guess. It's really just like, do this because it's a good thing to do and it's not that expensive in the long term. $10,000 to make a small little facility, that's a drop in the bucket for a lot of universities. That's like not even a quarter of someone's tuition for a semester for some places. Like that's just the reality of it. We're building a facility. That's about it. And that took a lot of begging. That took like 4 years. They said it was going to be done last year and it still isn't done. So like that shows how much they care. Nada. No, nothing. But hey, they're getting there. So if someone from Penn State watches this, hey, I still appreciate it. But still the overall consensus, you probably don't care. And that's reasonable. If I were, trying to make money, esports isn't the place to do it. Let's be real.
Something else that's important to remember is that while Collegiate is part of the path to pro, it isn't really integrated to the Overwatch League or Contenders the same way that Contenders and the Overwatch League are integrated. And as Paz says, the shortcomings of Contenders can actually be a boon to Collegiate, particularly in terms of who can play at those levels.
The thing is with Contenders, right, is those players are talented, but because there's like no money in there, you lose out on all these players that are really good, but they're not privileged to actually play in Contenders. And again, by no means am I saying Contenders players are bad, but every single one of them is privileged to be playing in Contenders. They're still good, but they are privileged to have a financial situation where they are able to play ranked that much a day. Collegiate kind of bridges the gap because the thing is Blizzard should really be investing in Collegiate or in Contenders. They really should be because by investing in a very healthy tier 2 scene, it will increase the longevity of your T1 scene. It'll actually maintain relevance over time because then people will understand the storylines that are happening in tier 2. And when they get to tier 1, it seems more epic. They don't give a shit about that. The thing that Collegiate does, though, is that it kind of makes up for the fact that Blizzard has no clue what they're doing with Path to Pro. Because then instead of having the game itself invest, it just has the colleges do that for them. So then what you can do is if someone's like really talented as a player, but they don't have that financial situation where they're privileged, they can then actually get scoped out by one of these teams that are giving like a full ride scholarship, like Redbirds, Harrisburg, Northwood. And then they can actually keep pursuing on that university team there and keep playing in Contenders there because they have the funding to do so. Collegiate isn't necessarily integrated in the path to pro. There's a lot of similarities between like, this is a Contenders player, this is a college player that that Contenders player can play for one of the best colleges, but it does kind of help bridge that gap.
The problem, as Paz will readily point out, is that there's a pretty severe structural limitation to Collegiate.
The sad part is, though, is it's reasonably only for people aged 18 to 24 because those are your college people. So if you're like 21, you just graduated college and now, Collegiate's big now. Well, you could still be really good, but now you have no support because you can't go back to school. Like, I guess you could, but at this point, it's like, just get a job.
However, as has already been mentioned, there are a decent number of players who play in both circuits. And for those players,
Collegiate provides a means to an end to playing Contenders while you're talented if you meet the criteria of you did well in high school, you got admitted to the campus, you're going to work really hard. It gives people an avenue to do that.
So, at this point we've talked about what Collegiate is, how someone could get involved with it, and why someone should consider getting involved. All that's really left is part 3. What's the experience of playing in Collegiate like? A lot of this video is kind of operated off of the assumption that I'm talking about someone who's looking to enter the competitive Overwatch scene, someone who's considering making the collegiate circuit their first step on the path to pro. However, the reality is that the path to pro isn't just a straight line. Players often bounce between different circuits or sometimes play in multiple at the same time, and one of those players just happens to be Paz.
When I used to play on attack mode, I had a very good environment, and that's what made that team so good. That's also why I think Collegiate is making a lot of stories for a lot of players that didn't get that chance before, because now they're finally getting in a good environment where they can truly push themselves. If you find an environment in Collegiate that you have the same values with, it'll be such a valuable experience, so much more so than what you're going to find just online. You could still find it online, but it's a lot harder to do so.
What I was really curious about here was like the time commitment. What's actually expected from someone who's playing in the collegiate circuit? And, well, like a lot of stuff so far, it really depends on the school you're playing at.
I think what's going to very easily paint this picture for everyone that's watching this is if I just go through my entire path to pro history and all of the different kind of environments I've been a part of. Before I played Collegiate, I played on attack mode, which was a tier 3 team that once I left, they right away made it to contenders. No, it was not because of me. I mean, you could, whatever. We could. I'm just trying to be biased, I guess. But for that team, I was expected to scrim 4 hours each day and 4 hours before just to like grind ranked. So 8888s. Also on weekends. So it was like 50 plus hours a week. You're just hard grinding Overwatch, if not more. Same thing for some of these other collegiate teams that you're getting a full ride. Like I know at Harrisburg, you're expected to play for the team and then also play for a contenders team or a tier 3 team with that same level of commitment that I was talking about before. If you're not able to make it on one of those teams, you're expected to play 8 hours of ranked a day. That's the high end. Now for Penn State, with where I am now, it really depends. Because our school, we don't get money. It's kind of relaxed, and it depends on how much we like the game, how much we like the meta. Last semester, we hated the meta. We played pretty bad. I don't even think we scrimmed I don't think we scrimmed. I don't even think we do. But this week, or not this week, this semester, we actually really enjoyed the meta. We scrim maybe like 2-3 times a week. We have games on the weekends. It's totally manageable. Like if I can do this while streaming, while making videos, while doing 18 credits, anyone can do this, so long as it's like reasonably you can do this if you're scared about it or on the fence. Because if you're scared about it or on the fence, you're likely not one of those people that are going to be playing in the top 8 schools, because you would have already been there. You would have already made that decision. What I'm saying is if you're on the fence and you're like, oh, is it going to be too much of time commitment? Just try it. Talk with the people that are managing it. If you get picked up, if you get a spot on the roster, express your concerns. You're probably going to be fine, I would say. The time commitment is not that bad, especially compared to some other clubs I've seen. For your organized environments, you're going to be expected, like I said, you're going to be expected to do your ranked or whatever you need to do for your mechanics. You're going to be expected to show up every night for your team practices, and you're going to be also expected to carve out some time to do VOD reviews. But for other teams, depends on the level of commitment y'all want. Typically, it's just like, hey, play ranked, make sure you're warm, make sure you're still trying to improve. Doesn't necessarily have to be every day. So if you're not enjoying yourself, and then also still like showing up to scrims, making sure that like you're still getting better as a team. It's not nearly as big of a commitment as the top end. It's similar in terms of like what you'll actually be expected to do, just not as much.
Now, a big part of collegiate sports, as opposed to esports, is travel. Teams play home and away games, and when they're playing away, they're often, loading up on buses or even planes for pretty significant amounts of time. Esports, given that they're digital, are a bit unique, but that doesn't mean that travel isn't still a part of the question.
I would say it's relatively minimal. It comes down to how much money you have. If you have a lot of money, typically, if there's a LAN somewhere you get invited to, they're probably just going to fly out. Penn State doesn't do that. We just drive. We've driven to a LAN twice this semester, about a 3-hour drive to and back, which is relatively not a lot compared to like there's always going to be a LAN in Kentucky, always going to be a LAN somewhere on each region for the CECC, which is like a regional weird tournament thing. I enjoyed it. It really depends. You will have opportunities to travel if you are on a collegiate team, but it's not going to be like traditional sports where it's like, oh, we have an away game this weekend. All right, we're leaving on Friday. Let's go. It's not nearly as much as traditional sports, but you still have like enough of it to be like, oh, I liked that. And that's a big differentiating factor between like, oh, I'm just playing contenders and I'm playing in collegiate. You're going to travel a little bit. You don't have to, but you can.
I kind of want to go back to something that Paz said a minute ago about not playing as much when the meta wasn't something they were having a lot of fun with. And that kind of got me wondering, how much does the meta actually affect how collegiate teams operate?
What I meant by the whole idea of like last semester we didn't play as much because of the meta, it was more so we just didn't enjoy it. I had to get put on Lucio because someone else wanted to play flex support. I didn't like it. No one liked it. It's definitely harder for a smaller school to react to the meta because you don't have a structured environment with the coach all the time. You don't have people that can play all the heroes. I can't give you a 100% true answer because sometimes we do just try to play ball into a meta where ball is terrible. Sometimes that's just how it works. But sometimes the meta is we're good enough at it to say, okay, we don't have to play comfort picks. We can try to learn this over the course of the year.
To me, this actually hits the core of what can make the lower circuits of any competitive scene really exciting. Necessity breeds innovation, and when you're working with limited resources, you need to get crafty with it, and that can lead to some really fun games to watch.
Sometimes you just bite the bullet and you say, fuck it, we're going to out-mechanic them. And in that sense, Collegiate's so much more fun to watch.
So up until this point, we've also kind of primarily focused on the more general experiences that someone might have if they're, just a university student who's playing in Collegiate. But I also kind of wanted to know what it's like to try and juggle the time commitments we've already talked about with being a student and being a content creator. Speaking from personal experience, it can be stressful even without Collegiate on the table. And I only make one video every 2 weeks. Paz put out 6 videos in March alone, and while it might seem like there would be a lot of overlap, it's not as simple as you might think.
As a content creator, it can get hard if you're not like super organized and make use out of every single minute you have. Luckily enough, I'm very important. I make that very important to be as efficient as possible, but it's hard, especially because you really cannot kill 2 birds with one stone with this kind of stuff. Like I can record scrims and maybe use that as background gameplay, but it also depends like, okay, the team I'm playing against in scrims, did we completely dumpster them? Did they completely dumpster us? That's not fun stuff to watch. And if it's kind of in the middle and then you start seeing player names, especially if you're more high profile of a YouTuber or on a higher profile team, people are going to start using my YouTube videos to scout what comps we're playing, how we play, where we're going to position. And that's why a lot of contenders players can't really stream because then, they just lose then because now all of those scrims that they recorded, you just lose now because people know how you're going to play. Same thing with Collegiate. I can't really do a whole lot with that kind of stuff because it's going to reveal our strategies.
Another important element of this is the question of, what kinds of content do people actually want to watch? There's a reason why you don't see a lot of Overwatch content creators who talk specifically or exclusively about the competitive scene, especially talking about the minor and collegiate circuits. People just don't really care enough to watch that content, and when your time is limited, you've got to prioritize your topics.
On the side of just doing collegiate content in general, being like, oh, like collegiate rankings, there's not enough viewership to justify me making collegiate type of content. Like 1,000 people care, which, wow, that sounds like really harsh, but like 1,000 people care. Maybe that might be pushing it. It's not worth it to be like, oh, well, Penn State, we did really well this weekend. People will be like, cool. So when's the Kiriko guide coming out? When's the positioning guide coming out? My God, that's like a 30-minute thing. You think I'm going to be able to do that every week? Not during fucking college. Over the summer,
I can definitely understand what Paz is saying here. From my own experience, my video about contenders was the second worst performing video on my channel. The only video it beat was the one that won a channel-wide poll for the ugliest thumbnail in a landslide. And that's the minor leagues. People know what contenders is, even if they don't necessarily follow it. Content about the collegiate circuit is an even harder sell because it's even more neglected by Blizzard in terms of everything from promoting the league to investing in teaching players how to conduct themselves when the spotlight's on them. And that last point in particular is something that I was really curious to hear Paz's take on. The Overwatch competitive circuits have been dealing with controversies relating to player conduct pretty much from the start. You were in the trenches on Reddit when the XQC Muma controversy went down, you know what I'm talking about, and I hope therapy's treating you well. At the time of that, though, a common argument was that this was part of the growing pains of the Overwatch esports scene, that gamer culture was just a bit more edgy and offensive, and it would take some time to sand down the edge, and for players to adjust to an environment where they are expected to maintain a lot more professionalism in their conduct under a lot more scrutiny. It was argued that this shouldn't be seen as a sign that these are like bad people, only that in a lot of cases, the language that a lot of gamers were using was a result of it being a bit of a boys' club where nobody would have called them out on it, and that sunlight would be the best disinfectant. However, given the recent controversy, and then backlash to that controversy surrounding a clip from a London Spitfire scrim that was leaked, it doesn't really seem like that change has manifested the way that some people thought it might. I wanted to see what Paz's perspective on the whole media training and media literacy side of things was, particularly in terms of how Blizzard has handled it in the past and in the present, or more accurately, how they haven't handled it. This is going to be a longer clip than most so far, but I want to let it run to make sure that Paz can fully explain his perspective and provide all the context that he wants to provide.
What I used to really care about like who people were behind like players and stuff. I thought that it was really important because quite frankly, orgs don't really do enough. I think the first thing for viewers is that you have to understand good player, good streamer does not equate to good person. When you start thinking, oh, I really like this guy, he's really funny, he's such a cool guy, like he must be great, I'm like his friend, you're getting into parasocial parries. Most people in Overwatch League, they talk like that in that leaked Spitfire VOD. They shouldn't. I don't agree with it. That's why I don't support them. I think people should have some media literacy and understand most of these people that, wow, they sit and on their ass 10 hours a day and like play Overwatch and don't really talk to anyone outside. Yeah, they probably aren't the best people. They probably aren't socialized like that. I'm not saying that to excuse their behavior. I'm just saying from an outsider in, it should be a higher priority. That's for sure. The thing is, the big reason why that is the way it is now is because a lot of the people that used to be OG Overwatch League left, like XQC, all those people got kicked out, where the heated drama was what he said there. And that entire time you had a neglected tier 2 scene that was ran, it was like Lord of the Flies. It was ran by a bunch of 16-year-olds that are magically 20 years old now. And wait, why are they saying all these things? How have they never been trained to not say heinous things when they play video games? How are they not trained this way? Well, there was no money in tier 2 or any responsibility or anything to really lose for these players down there that really drilled it into their head like, hey, be a better person. Realistically, this is a problem that's just going to be within Overwatch now because of the systemic way that Blizzard has set this thing up. I don't excuse their behavior, but the biggest thing we can do is just understand bigger number, not better person. Better player, not better person. A lot of these people are terrible people. That's just how it be. You like the way they play the game. You don't like the way they are because you don't know how they are. Parasocial relationships, please don't develop them. Everyone's human. Because we didn't invest in a more professional tier 2 scene, when people eventually did get to T1, they don't know how to act professional. They still act like gamers. Like, no, you are a professional. But they don't know that because they're not used to that. And that's also a problem I have with you. That's why I quit. Because I'm like, whenever I lose to someone that I know is a racist bigot that hates like trans and gay people, it doesn't feel good to lose against them. It feels terrible. They're going to keep pushing. They're going to push their dreams. They're going to have more eyes on them, more fans when they are terrible people. And I know that people that look up to these people are kids that don't understand media literacy like that. They don't understand that they're not good people. They're just good players. That is such a problem. And the reason why those problems exist is because we didn't take action for tier 2. If we would have had a more professional environment, a more professional path, all of this could have been avoided. I wish we lived in a world where the most terrible thing a professional player said was what XQC said. That was still a terrible thing. The action was completely justified. But now because we didn't even, we took a short-term like slap on the wrist, we took out XQC, the aftermath is so much more terrible. Colleges, though, it provides a much better avenue to force people to be professional because then you're going to lose your scholarship and your future is fucked.
At this point, we've run pretty long, so I'm going to wrap it up here with just one last thing from Paz.
For Collegiate, it's different what you're going to get and what you're going to experience depending on the college that you go to. And just be real with yourself. Think about it for like a little bit before you make a decision. And just give yourself in to the place that you go to and understand that like it doesn't have to be a professional whatever, like what you want out of it. There is a place that you can get that and you can pursue that. Just be real with yourself. The best teams are value-based. They're not rank-based, and you'll get there. I think Collegiate is the thing that Overwatch needed to make it somewhat coherent in the path to pro, but it still will just not be enough, which kind of sucks.
And that's where this video ends. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like, subscribe, all that other stuff the algorithm loves, and let me know your thoughts on Collegiate in the comments. I know that even by my rapidly shifting standards on this channel, this was a pretty long video, and doing an interview-heavy thing was a real change for me, but I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. I also just want to say again, a huge thank you to Paz for agreeing to be part of this video and giving his insights into this part of the scene that just isn't seen very often. If you've enjoyed him in this video, be sure to go subscribe to his channel. And if you're looking for more from me, YouTube's about to offer a suggestion from my channel, but if you're curious about the scene and haven't seen it already, I'd personally recommend checking out my video about contenders that I've mentioned a couple times so far. Both of those videos will be popping up in just a second. Last thing before we go, the poll for members to decide between these 4 videos will be closing on April 10th, so if you really want to see one of them get made, be sure to click that join button below to cast your vote. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.